Hello, I'm Derek with North Little Rock's Lehman Library and want to welcome you to Meet the Author. On this program, we highlight and showcase local authors from our community, and we are always looking for more. If you are an author or know an author, we invite you to participate with us by calling our front desk at 501-758-1720 or send us a message through our Facebook or Instagram pages. Joining us today is Carla McClafferty. Ms. McClafferty is an award-winning author of nonfiction who has written books on a variety of subjects on science and history, such as George Washington, Marie Curie, X-rays, concussions in football, an American Holocaust rescuer, and spies and espionage. She's here today to discuss her new book and read a segment from Spies in the American Revolution for Kids, a history book. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you for joining us. This is a great honor.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. Why don't you begin, please, by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a native of Arkansas, and I began my writing career after the death of my youngest son. I felt very strongly that I was supposed to write a book, an inspirational book about the death of my son, and that began my career. Mm-hmm. After that, I began writing nonfiction books for young readers, and I started with the topic of X-rays because my first career is as a radiologic technologist, so I sort of had that background.
And that book is for young people?
Yes.
Okay. Did you find that difficult? I mean, for me, something as, I want to say, esoteric as X-rays could be somewhat difficult for, let's say, a 10-year-old, 12-year-old to understand. Was it?
That's actually the age group that I really think about as I write. I really think about what does an average 10-year-old know about the world, what would be something that they don't know that I would need to explain. So I do a lot of explanations in my book, but I do it in a way that is just kind of part of the story, so it doesn't feel like it's teaching. It just feels like it's part of the story.
Well, as I look at the books that we have here displayed, I mean, you've written on a variety of topics: Fourth Down in Inches, The Many Faces of George Washington, Something Out of Nothing, which is a book about Marie Curie, The Head Bones Connected to the Neck Bone, Teen Titans, Forgiving God, and then this little book about George Washington. Right. So it's a very disparate group of subjects. So congratulations to you, because some authors get into a groove and never get out of it. It looks like you've really ventured into different topics.
Well, and then one that I don't have here with me today is about an American Holocaust rescuer. Yes. And so that I do have a wide variety of topics that fascinate me and that I feel very passionate about. So that's another one that's a totally different direction.
Okay. All right. Because we're talking about Spies in the American Revolution for kids, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about what the book is about?
Okay. It's really about the very fascinating topic of the spies that worked during the American Revolution. I think for most Americans, I think we know very little about the American Revolution. So I've written about it before, and I'm fascinated by it. But the idea that spies existed and the way that they did was kind of a new idea for me. And so the incredible stories and the incredible bravery that so many ordinary people stepped up and accomplished during those days really is just a moving story, and very few people know anything about it.
How long did it take you to write this book, and how did you do your research?
This book is a little bit different. This was a book that a publisher contacted me and asked me to write. And so it was extremely quick for me. And by quick, I mean like 7 weeks. Wow. Most of my books take years to write. I was able to do it, though, because I had a vast, background in the Revolution. I know I've written about George Washington a lot. I know a lot about about that period of time. And so I was able then to just concentrate on the spy aspect of it. So that's kind of how it happened, and I worked like mad for about 7 weeks.
Was it, and I'm not trying to be draconian, but was it a good relationship with this publisher? I mean, would you recommend this publisher?
Well, it's a different animal. This is sort of what's called a work for hire project.
Oh, okay. Most
of my other books, all except for one, have been a project that I developed myself. I did the research. It was all my own, and this was one that came to me.
Okay.
And so they asked me if I would write it, and then I kind of considered if I wanted to do it or not. So it was a fine experience for what it is, which is a work for hire project.
I ask that because there are people who want to become authors, and part of the business is working with a publisher.
Yes. So, okay. It's definitely a business.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Something I noticed in this book that everything I learned so many things in this book, but one thing I noticed was that Army personnel seem to talk a lot more to non-Army people more than they do today, so that it was almost as if like they were giving away secrets to people who weren't even in the Army, which I couldn't imagine in the 21st century.
Exactly. I mean, it would not happen that way now. Certainly, there's still spies today.
Yes.
But I think to really understand this period of time is that we started a war with nothing. So there was no army. There was none of that. So everybody was a regular person, and then suddenly one day there's an army.
Yes.
So it's not at all like it is today. So that's kind of why it took so many ordinary people to be a spy.
Okay, right. Now, one thing when I picked this book up, I thought, it'll be about the American spies, but I'm glad you put in the British spies and the techniques they use, such as the mask letter.
Right.
And in case the audience doesn't, they probably would know, is there any way you can describe without a picture what a mask letter is?
Absolutely. A mask letter is, imagine that there is a random pattern cut out of a piece of paper, and then you lay that random pattern that has a hole in it over a piece of paper, and you write your real message within that space of that pattern. Then you take that pattern off, and then you have your real message. Then you've got to create a letter that blends with those words, so that somebody, if it was intercepted, it was just about nonsense. But when you put the pattern over it, the recipient would have the same pattern. Then they would read the code. So it was a secret message within a letter that seemed to be about nothing.
Okay, all right, yes. All those techniques, invisible ink. I didn't even know they had it back then.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is, yes. Now, John Champ's story of trying to catch Benedict Arnold, I thought they could make a movie out of that. It was so intriguing. Would you please comment on that?
I totally agree with you. I think it is movie worthy, because when Benedict Arnold attempts to sell West Point and George Washington, by the way, he was going to betray Washington and West Point. When that happened and his betrayal became known, and he runs and of course becomes a general in the British Army. Washington was so incredibly hurt that this very well-decorated war general would turn, that he wanted him badly. He wanted him to pay for what he'd done. And so, of course, they wanted him back. They wanted to get him. And so they chose this young man, John Champs, who was a big, strapping Virginian, and they staged for him to desert the American Army, and it was a fake way of just getting him out, but it had to be real. The bosses knew what he was going to do, but his own friends thought he had deserted. So he embeds in the British Army in Benedict Arnold's group with the absolute one intention was to get him back to Washington. And then on the very day that his plan was going to happen, they were going to send them by ship, and it could not happen. Mm-hmm. So if they had been delayed one day, Benedict Arnold would have been taken back to George Washington.
It was, I mean, I don't know that I knew the end, but I almost knew in the back of my mind he gets away. But it was so gripping. You keep thinking, oh, he's going to catch him. He's going to get him. And then, oh, it was like I don't know what the expression is, but oh my God, just my stomach fell when he got away. It was just, yeah.
Good.
Maybe you can write a script and or maybe even for children, just a TV movie or something like that, because it was movie worthy. It really was.
You.
Yes.
Thank you.
The way you wrote it and the story itself, but the way you wrote it. Yes.
Thank you.
I found also that as opposed to just trying to get secrets, that deception to create espionage was impressive. That Washington wrote letters that let me start over. Washington wrote letters and wanted them to make sure that the British found them. Right. And I never thought of doing things that way. Can you make a comment on that?
Absolutely. You know, it is probably not very well known about George Washington that he was the spy master. Washington is really an incredible leader. He's an incredible general, an incredible man, and he was the spy master. And he understood that they must have an edge, and spying was it. And he knew what the British Army thought he was going to do, and so he led them to believe that that's exactly what he was going to do, when all the time he was not going to do that. And so one of the big times that happened is he led them to believe they were going to attack New York City toward the end of the war, when indeed they were going to Yorktown. And so he went so far as to have boats built on the Hudson, and to have bread that the French were going to help us, and have bread ovens built as if we're gearing up to start feeding these French soldiers. And it was a ruse to make the British believe that they were going to attack New York.
Yeah. When I was studying history, and this was a long time ago, history was dominated by men. And so I was very pleased to see that, because I'm hoping that young ladies, girls, will want to pick up this book, because you talk about some of the women who were spies. And so can you willing to talk about one or something, or at least in that area? Yeah,
there were a lot of women. One of the British spies that was the female British spy pretended to be a peddler, and she went into Washington's camp. And peddlers were always around, and they would sell little things to the troops, and she would watch. She would notice the kind of weapons they had, the number of people they had, the kind of ships and then she took it all back to the British. And so there were people that did that on a routine basis, as she did. And then there were people like in the Culper ring, Anna Strong, who was part of that incredible spy ring, and she just communicated between people, and she did that with a clothesline, which is really very interesting. And so when one of the messengers was in the area, she hung a black petticoat on the clothesline, and then the number of handkerchiefs that she hung there was the code to tell the other one where he was going to be. So it was a way to communicate, and if somebody saw you hanging out your laundry, it was meaningless. So there were lots of women in lots of different ways that took part and were incredibly brave and risked their lives over and over.
Yeah. Well, I hope that people who are watching this program, especially if they're children watching, they'll keep that in mind, and that they will either come to the library or we'll contact you, which we'll get to in a little bit, to read this book, because it is really a well-written book and very entertaining. Okay?
Thank you.
Having said that, then, I want to invite you to read a section of your book, and I will be quiet and let you speak.
Thank you. I'd be delighted to. This is a little section it's a little bit into the book, and this is how it goes. Spies Wanted. Once the Declaration of Independence was signed, there was no going back. King George III considered the colonists who resisted his authority to be rebels and traitors. War was coming. Great Britain had the most powerful army and navy in the world. They had professional soldiers, sailors, and commanding officers. They had complex systems that provided supplies for their troops. They had uniforms and shoes, food and drink, muskets and ammunition. They had cannons and ships. The Continental Army had nothing. No army, no navy, no officers, no soldiers, no sailors, no uniforms, no food, no ammunition, no guns, no ships, and no experience fighting a war. But the Patriots had one thing the British didn't have: General George Washington. Washington was one of the few patriots with a military experience. During the French and Indian War, he learned how to lead an army. However, what the general saw when he arrived at his headquarters in Cambridge, Massachusetts, could not be called an army. They were farmers and shopkeepers and booksellers and fishermen and painters and tailors, candle makers, blacksmiths, lawyers, and doctors. They drifted in from all over the colonies. Most carried the rifles they used for hunting game to feed their families. They had no military training, but they all had one thing in common with their general: they were willing to do whatever it took to fight for an independent nation.
All right. Thank you so very much.
Welcome.
All right. This has been a pleasure. Before we close, how can viewers purchase the book, or how can they contact you by social media?
Great. The book can be purchased. Probably the most convenient way is online, and it's on Amazon and through the publisher. So that's probably the easiest way. I'm easy to find on social media if you spell McClafferty correctly with two C's, and so I'm easy to find. I have an unusual name, so it's easy to pop up.
All right. All right. Well, thank you so very much, Carla. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for joining us today. It has been a pleasure to you and to us. If you're interested in reading more from Miss McClafferty, please visit us at the library or find us online at Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or our website, nlrlibrary.org. Please join us again next time, and have a great day, everyone.